I want to bring in for immediate reaction here Mark Thiessen, former chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush. He's now an American Enterprise Institute scholar and a Fox News contributor. Also, Republican Congressman Michael Waltz from Florida joining us as well. And Congressman, let me start with you. We've all been watching and listening to this intently, trying to figure out exactly what went on in this meeting. What is your takeaway?
You know, Martha, I think President Biden is slipping into becoming a modern-day Neville Chamberlain. This, appeasement approach is not going to work with Vladimir Putin. What we're continuing to see as a theme out of the White House are actions that we will take after Russia invades Ukraine, if Russia invades Ukraine. I think at this point it's clear it's not a matter of if, but when and how far he goes. And the actions we need to see are what we are going to do right now. Sanctions in place now. Military equipment moving to help our Ukrainian allies, like more Javelin missiles, and importantly, air defense assets like the Stingers now. We have to begin seriously raising the cost for Putin and turning the Ukraine into a porcupine. And just one other thing, Jake Sullivan is being completely disingenuous when he says this has nothing to do with Afghanistan and nothing to do with Nord Stream 2. The pipeline is built. All it takes is the new German government to certify it. And that's really just a paperwork drill. What Putin knows in the middle of winter is he will be able to starve Ukraine and starve Eastern Europe, and he'll be able to hold Germany hostage with their energy supply. And finally, with the sanctions, you have to have those both in euros and in dollars. Putin knows he can withstand UN sanctions if he has a fractured Europe, and Nord Stream 2 is exactly what's going to fracture Europe and therefore fracture NATO. So like so many other policy blunders, this is one of this administration's own making, and we're on the verge of the largest land invasion in Europe since World War II.
I think the point that you make about whether or not the sanctions come now based on the buildup that we're seeing is really important. They wanted very much to have this Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which would go to Germany. As you just pointed out, Mark, President Trump didn't want that. He knew it would be empowering to Putin, empowering to Russia. And now it's all done but the turning on. And at this point, Congressman Waltz, Jake Sullivan seems to be suggesting, oh, we can still turn that off. The fact that we've allowed that process to move as far as it has is not a big deal. That's leverage for us. Is it leverage for this White House?
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, Martha, this White House is bringing talking points to a gunfight, and a lot of this is because of their asinine energy policy. Talk to Larry Kudlow when he was in the previous administration. We had the pieces in place to export American gas, which, by the way, is cleaner gas on LNG ships, liquefied natural gas, to the Ukraine to then supply Eastern Europe. That would have reduced the stranglehold that Russia has on Ukraine. And meanwhile, once they get once that pipeline, they flip the switch on it, all of Western Europe is then hostage to the whims of Vladimir Putin. So they can isolate and dominate our allies in Eastern Europe, and they can hold our allies in Western Europe. And why does this matter to the American people? Well, look, Iran is watching as they're racing towards a nuke. China is watching. North Korea is watching. And the leading think tanks in Moscow have said that Afghanistan absolutely mattered.
Congressman, stand by if you would. We want to go back to the White House briefing for just a moment. This is interesting.
We're focused on what our objectives are. The president laid those out in those calls yesterday and in a follow-up call again today, and we'll let them speak for themselves on what they have the intention of doing.
And Jake just made clear that the president delivered some warnings to Putin today. What is, in his view, the timeline that he's looking at if Putin does heed those warnings and does de-escalate? What's the time frame for that?
For when Putin might de-escalate?
How long does he think that would take? Is he looking at the next several days, the next several weeks?
I'm not going to give you an assessment for that. That's really up to President Putin. Our objective is to prevent Russia and President Putin from invading Ukraine. So, of course, we want them to de-escalate, but that was the clear bottom line of the message.
And one last question, just logistics. Is the president going to attend the funeral for Bowe Berghdal?
He, of course, considered former Senator Bob Dole a friend, somebody he admired greatly, as you saw in the statement, but I will let them announce any specifics of the plans for the funeral. Go ahead.
Just quickly on the
All right, gentlemen, I want to go back on this one more time with you, because this is what was coming out from the Kremlin side, that Vladimir Putin stressed that the responsibility should not be shifted onto the shoulders of Russia, since it is NATO that is making dangerous attempts to conquer Ukrainian territory and is building up its military potential at our borders. Therefore, Russia is seriously interested in obtaining reliable, legally fixed guarantees, excluding the expansion of NATO in the eastern direction and the deployment of offensive strike weapon systems in the states adjacent to Russia. In other words, get out of our backyard or we're going to keep moving westward. Congressman Waltz.
Well, I was just out at the Reagan Library this past weekend, and under Ronald Reagan, we don't have Moscow dictating the terms for what the United States and NATO does. Maybe under Biden that will happen. I pray it doesn't. But you have to look at this. This is a win-win for Putin. He facilitates a crisis and then demands legal guarantees of what NATO will and won't do. Or he invades and creates a slippery slope, because I'm telling you, after Ukraine, will be our allies in Poland, Hungary, Romania, and certainly in the Baltic states. And again, meanwhile, can hold Western Europe hostage with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So, he is playing chess here, and I'm afraid in many ways we're playing checkers.
Yeah, I mean, the big question mark is what if? What if he does begin to invade? And these sanctions come on and they don't really rattle them too much. What are we prepared to do? Ukraine is not a member of NATO, which is painfully apparent to them, obviously, at this point. What would we do?
Well, we can follow a model of what President George W. Bush did when Russia threatened Georgia. Jake Sullivan mentioned that, and said, well, we still had troops in Afghanistan and they invaded Georgia. Well, actually, we actually deterred them from a full invasion of Georgia. And one of the first things President Bush did is he sent military cargo flights into Georgia's capital, Tbilisi, which put American boots on the ground, not in a combat role, but in a cargo delivery role, which was a deterrent to Russia to marching on Tbilisi. We should be arming Ukraine now to deter Russian intervention, not using that aid as a carrot for Vladimir Putin to not invade and draw down. And we should be absolutely giving them no guarantees whatsoever that Ukraine will not be a member of NATO, because that would be a victory. We don't want to let teach both President Putin and and North Korea and China and other countries and Iran that if you precipitate a crisis, you can get stuff out of the United States. Vladimir Putin has to walk away with this with nothing, or else this is another projection of weakness on the part of the president.
What do you expect?
Martha,
go ahead, Congressman Waltz.
No, and Martha, I think it matters what we arm them with as well. The Ukrainians have been specifically asking for air defense systems to deal with the Russian Air Force, and importantly, to deal with anti-ship assets as well. Those, I think, would raise the cost significantly for Putin, may cause him to think twice. But again, if the intelligence estimates are this may happen in the next 4 to 8 weeks, right, they've got to send that stuff right now or it won't get there in time.
We're going to dip back in for just a moment. Stay with us if you would.